Kamran Pasha is a screenwriter and a director, and is one of the first Muslims to succeed in Hollywood. He recently served as co-executive producer and head writer for Disney's Tron animated television series. Among his other credits include serving as writer and producer of Showtime's Golden Globe-nominated Sleeper Cells, as well as writer and producer on NBC's remake of The Bionic Woman. For those of you who remember The Bionic Woman when it was in its first run, you know, it was an exciting show. One caveat, this is not a Muslim bionic woman, because she'd never make it through a metal detector. Too soon? Kamran is a published novelist as well. Mother of the Believers is a novel showing the rise of Islam through the vantage point of Aisha radiallahu anhu, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His second novel, Shadow of the Swords, follows the conflict between Richard I, Richard the Lionhearted, and the Muslim leader Salahuddin for control of Jerusalem during the Crusades. Both of these books may be purchased in the conclusion of our program today. Kamran holds a bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College, as well as an MBA from the Tuck School at Dartmouth, a law degree from Cornell Law, as well as a Master of Fine Arts from the UCLA Film School. Now, what Kamran does is to help to shape and to change the lens by which Muslims are viewed in popular culture. And for some of you who are wondering, what does this have to do with the think tank? What does this have to do with the work that ISPU does? Well, it is critical in its interconnection because ISPU's work is to shape public opinion through policy. And so we find that there's an inextricable link between how popular culture then informs popular policy. I'd like to invite Kamran now to help show us how these dots are connected. Kamran Pasha.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for that incredibly gracious introduction. I'm going to start off by saying something. I'm embarrassed to say that before this year, I was not aware of ISPU. I wasn't aware of what the organization was doing, but I was sitting around grumbling, saying, I wish something like this existed. And then when they contacted me, I said, wait a minute, you really do? And you've been around it for years, you've been doing this work? And I was blown away. Because I do want to talk about how my work in the media and in Hollywood connects directly with ISPU's mission. You know, it's interesting because one of the primary reasons I entered into the media industry, into filmmaking, into publishing, was because, you know, I was born in Pakistan, but I immigrated to the United States in '76 when I was 3 years old. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And, you know, growing up in the '70s, the only image of Islam I ever saw was villains. And it's interesting because it didn't get better in the 80s and didn't get better in the 90s. But it changed. The kind of portrayal of Islam changed. Now, having worked in the film world for 10 years, I have a sense of where the journey has been for the other people in Hollywood who've been portraying Muslims. In the 70s, it's interesting, you know, I got to work on Bionic Woman. As a kid, I loved the original show. And I remember that I must have been 6 or 7 years old watching the original Bionic Woman, and I remember, maybe some remember, there was the episode where she went to the Middle East. Do you remember that episode? It's a really campy, silly episode, almost as silly as when she deals with Bigfoot, but it was tragic for me, right? It was tragic for me because I was 6 or 7 years old watching it, and you know, even at the age of 6 or 7, I knew that the portrayal of Muslims on Bionic Woman was just wrong. I mean, you had this guy with 14 wives, and you had these villains who were just screaming Allahu Akbar, and they didn't really have the agenda, and then Bionic Woman kicked their butt, and it was just, I was like, even as a kid, I was like, what is this, right? And what was happening in the 70s, in the film world was that people were putting Muslims on television and in movies, but they weren't coming with any agenda. They had no information. The only information they had was maybe they read the Arabian Nights in high school, right? And so they had some vague idea of what Islam was to them, it wasn't even negative, it was just empty. In the 80s, the image changed. In 79, you had the Iranian Revolution, you had U.S. involvement in Lebanon and the death of the Marines, and so you had a lot of things happening in the 80s that suddenly began to show Islam as a threat. In the 70s, Islam wasn't a threat, it was just this amorphous other with no information. So the information you were getting in the 80s was that this is a violent and dangerous and fanatical religion. In the 90s, with many of the tensions that were happening with the first Gulf War and a lot of the things that were happening in Palestine, it became something that the people started bringing apocalyptic energy to, right? The information that was coming, then you had churches and other groups start talking about all these events that are happening in the Middle East are linked to apocalyptic prophecies. The fight against Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War was prophesied in the book of Daniel, that kind of stuff, right? And people were buying into that. And then in the 2000s, we're the legacy of September 11th. And I just want to talk a little bit about September 11th in a specific way, how it impacted me. I had, as you heard, I went through all that journey of getting a lot of degrees, and it was primarily for the reasons that I think many of us do get them is, I wanted economic security, I wanted social status, I wanted to make my parents happy, I wanted to fit in. I had been a writer since I was a little boy. I mean, I was writing short stories at the age of 7 or 8 years old, and I knew, regrettably for all my brothers and sisters out here who are in the sciences, I quickly figured out that I did not have skill in math or science. If you gave me a scalpel, it would end very badly for everyone involved. And so I said, okay, you know what? I know how to talk, I know how to write, that's my only skill. And I don't know what I can do with that. How can I make money? And the only thing I knew as growing up was, well, maybe I can become a lawyer. And I'm sure there's a few lawyers here. And as you know, communication is pivotal to our profession. And so I had that tunnel vision goal of becoming a lawyer since I was a kid, because that's the only place where I can find a marketable outlet for my only skill, which is communication. And so I went through all the process. I got all these nice degrees. I got my little MBA. My father was very happy with that. I'll be honest with you, I was bored out of my mind, because I just wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories. And from childhood, I had been told Muslims can't do this, because we're talking about information. Regrettably, the Muslims also have incorrect information about what America is and what the opportunities are here. I'll give you an example. When I was 6 years old, I was watching another great show, Three's Company, right? And I was too young to actually get the double entendres. I didn't really get what they were saying. But Jack Tripper would say something, would knock his head, and it would be funny. And I was watching it with my sister, and I love my sister very much. I have two sisters. My older sister, we were watching it together. She was 7, I was 6, watching Three's Company. And I remember this. I actually remember this vividly. I turned to her and said, one day, inshallah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make movies and television. And the great thing, this is so revelatory. She turned to me, and she's very supportive, but she turned to me, 7 years old, and said to me, oh, you're not going to do that. Our people don't get to do that. And I revealed already at the age of 6 or 7, I knew what my limitations were as a Muslim in this country, because our people don't get to do that. And so I was working at a law firm, a really wonderful law firm in New York, and I should have been happy because I had achieved my life's ambition, and I was completely unfulfilled. The law is a wonderful profession, and it is a really important profession for Muslims to be involved in. It wasn't ultimately for me, and I had spent 20 years getting there. And so I had written a script in school. I'd actually written a screenplay, a teen horror movie, nothing great and Islamic, just, your teen girl goes up the stairs, a guy with a knife chases her, like a Halloween type movie. I'd written it to pass the time when I was bored in a class in school. So I took that script out and I said, maybe I can get some attention. And this was in 2000. This was in the fall of 2000. And I put it out there. I just found, people asked me, brother, how did you become a screenwriter? I don't know how to do it. I said, I don't know how to do it. I went to a bookstore and found a book of agents. so I sent them a copy of my script. And everyone rejected it. I got like all these rejection letters within a week. So nobody wanted to read it. Nobody knew who I was. That's the worst way to get an agent, by the way. And so I did it that way because I didn't know anyone. But by the grace of God, one person responded and said, sure, I'll look at your script. And I don't hear from him for 6 months. I forget all about it. And I keep doing my work as a lawyer, thinking that's my destiny. And then one day, he calls me out of nowhere and says, this is actually a really good script. I'd like to represent you. A month later, I had sold my first script. A month after that, I had sold a second one. And this is how God works. Literally, he will show, all this time, Muslims saying, it is not possible, it cannot be done. And they will stop you, who they are, right? They will stop you. And subhanAllah, within a few weeks of trying, I'd sold 2 scripts to Paramount. I was like, I can do this. This childhood dream suddenly came back alive. The reason I'm giving you the date is that I moved in April of 2001. I had one of the most difficult conversations I had with my mother because my parents were retired. As a hardworking attorney in New York, I was supporting them, paying their mortgage, taking care of them. And now I was going to tell my mom, after I sold these couple of scripts, I said, you know, Mom, I think I'm going to quit my job as a lawyer and I move to Hollywood and I'm going to become a screenwriter professionally. And I don't know when I can support you again. I don't know that I can pay your mortgage again because it's an unpredictable profession. And the one thing the Muslim community was obsessed about was stability and security. And the great thing, as all of you who are mothers will understand this, the great thing, I was terrified having that conversation with my mother. And the great thing is she turned to me and said, you know, it took you long enough to figure this out. I was never going to be a writer. You know, you used to walk around when I was cooking in the kitchen when you were 5 years old and tell me stories and they made sense. It would begin, middle, and end. It would be good stories. This was your destiny. I'm glad you have the courage. She said, I believe in Allah. He will put food on my table. You go do what you have to do. Okay? So that's why Paradise is at the feet of the mothers, which is my first novel, Mother of the Believers. That's the quote that opens the book, and it's dedicated to my mother. So April 2001, I moved there, and initially I'm one of the very first Muslims to get any attention. I sold a couple of scripts. Who's this guy, right? I've arrived, and my agent's like, look, well, you know, being a Muslim, maybe we can use that to our advantage, and maybe you can write about stuff, because, you know, by then, you had, obviously, the Muslim terrorist was a staple on television and in movies, so maybe you can write about these issues, but in a more sophisticated fashion. So they said, get a writing sample to show that you know these issues in the region. So I wrote and again, going back to what ISPU does with information, right? I said, I have more information than most screenwriters here. I know these issues. If you want to write about terrorism that's coming out of Muslim communities, I can write about that, but in a way that's accurate and reflecting what's really happening and what the community is really about, actually. So I wrote a script in 2001 about, it was a hypothetical script about what would happen in the United States if there had been a major terrorist attack to our legal system. It was set in the kind of script of how our civil liberties might be curtailed. And so the script went around town. People were reading it. This guy really understands this stuff. This isn't your typical Allahu Akbar guy shooting up stuff. This is really sophisticated things. And it was a social critique of America, all kinds of stuff. So I started getting meetings. And in the fall of 2001, I got what I thought was going to be my big, incredible break. You all know that show Law and Order? So I got called in to Law and Order because they were doing a mini-series. This is what, August of 2001, I get called in. Dick Wolf, the creator of Law and Order, was going to do a mini-series that was going to tie in all the TV shows, Law and Order, SVU, Criminal Intent, bring all the shows together on this epic one-week mini-series about a hypothetical terror attack on New York City and how the different groups work together to solve who did it, right? It was supposed to be I believe it was a poisoning of the water supply kind of thing, And so they called me and they said, we read your script and, we're doing this miniseries and, the villains are going to be Muslim, but you actually have a really sophisticated understanding of what motivates Al-Qaeda, these other groups, and how it's different from what Muslims really are about. We want to bring your perspective in. And again, all the Muslims said, nobody had it. These people really wanted the information that I had to give them, right, that they didn't have. So they brought me in, and then I was like, wow. It's like, if you do a good job in the miniseries, we could hire you on Law and Order, which is the top show. And I was like, hey, that's pretty good. My ego got huge. I'm about to become one, Muslim, nobody 6 months ago. Now I'm about to work on Law and Order. CEO, everyone told me, you can't do it. Ha, okay? The meeting to meet the producers of Law and Order, the actual big shots who were going to make the decision if I was going to be working on the show, was dated for the week of September 11, 2001. Whoa. Okay? That meeting was canceled, if you can imagine. Okay, it was canceled that morning. The next several years after that were incredible struggle. We've all struggled in all of our ways. And there's no greater struggle than the people that have dealt with the immediate impact of September 11, those who lost their families and those who are dealing with the pain of it today. I had my minister. By Allah's mercy, my family was all in New York. My sister saw it with her own eyes. She saw it from her window, the plane hitting. So it had its impact. On my professional life, the very thing that was making me this interesting new guy who could bring information was suddenly anathema. Everyone was afraid of it. It was almost impossible for me to get work in the next 2 years because I suddenly became labeled as the Muslim guy. And actually nobody wanted the information, they were afraid of it. And shows like 24 were starting, which in the really early days of 24, if you remember, the Muslim villains were, we were going right back to the old Allahu Akbar, and Jack Bauer's chasing these guys, they don't have an agenda, but they got a nuclear bomb, right? And so you got to stop them. And so that was what was coming, and I was really despairing. But the way God works is you just have to do the work, which is what ISPU is doing. You do the work, you lay the seeds, you don't know what it's going to lead to. I'm about to show you a clip of something of where it all changed. So after 3 years, no, after 4 years, 4 years of struggling in Hollywood, just barely making by. Remember, I've got all these degrees that sound so cool, and I have all the student debt, and all my friends are working on Wall Street for major firms and doing cool things and working at Goldman Sachs. And here I am, like, I'm borrowing money from my parents. Every one of you can imagine how shameful that felt to me. My retired parents, who I should be supporting, I'm borrowing money from them to pay my rent to survive in LA. And they're never saying to me, come home, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this is shameful. I gotta either make a break now or go home and figure it out. And then in 2005, that script that I wrote, remember back in 2001 that nobody wanted to look at anymore? I got a call from my agent saying Showtime Networks has developed a TV series, which is unusual. They want to do a TV series called Sleeper Cell about a Muslim who is an FBI agent who fights Al-Qaeda. Well, the hero would be Muslim. And they read your script. They're like, again, the script that I thought was my curse, 4 years later, they read that thing that this guy understands these issues. They brought me in and interviewed me. They're like, you're a Muslim? They never met one. They make a show about Muslims. They met one, I'm sure, in advisory capacity. They went to a masjid to talk about the show. They never met one professionally. They're like, really? There's a Muslim here? And so I was hired on the show. And I'm actually going to show you a clip in a second here. Many Muslims initially said to me, and this is the thing I'm going to talk about in the second part of my talk, is the Muslim that you should not be. The Muslims that are here are acting, and those who have already donated 120,000, inshallah, will give the rest and more, are acting the way Muslims should act. But I've also dealt with the way Muslims should not act, which is to be negative and destructive when Muslims are trying to advance things. So when I was involved in the series, even before the show had come out, Muslims started contacting me and saying, astaghfirullah, you're involved yet again in another stupid thing about Muslim terrorists. I said, brother, do you think I would betray Islam? Why don't you watch the show? Watch the show. No, I'm not going to watch it. Okay, fine. So I'm going to show you a clip that was from the 4th episode of season 1, which was submitted for an Emmy for Best Writing. And this was, thank you. Thank you. So this is an episode of Sleeper Cell. Sleeper Cell, again, is about a Muslim, an African-American Muslim, who infiltrates an Al-Qaeda terror cell. And the scene that you're going to see here, this particular episode is the one that got the most critical acclaim. Because it's an episode dedicated to a debate between an imam and an Al-Qaeda extremist. And the imam wins this debate throughout the episode, right? I'm just going to show you 5 or 6 minutes of that debate. The entire episode, 1 hour long, is a debate between fools who don't understand Islam and people who do. And by the end of the episode, I was getting emails from all over the country saying, I learned more about the beauty of Islam in this 1 hour of television than I have from 20 years of information from the media. Okay? And this is really Allahu Akbar. As any one of you who is an artist of any kind, or even is just doing it as a hobby knows, when our work is good, whether you draw, you paint, you write poetry, song, I don't care what it is, whatever your art is, when you're it's like to be in the zone, right? When you're in the zone, right? Okay? You don't remember you don't actually consciously know what's happening. When I read my best material, I don't remember it. I read my novels, I don't remember writing them. I remember the act of writing them, I don't remember the words. They're surprising to me as you. This episode was written in 24 hours. It takes people 2 or 3 weeks to write a script. I wrote this in one night. It exploded out of me. The scene that you're going to see here was written at 3 a.m. in the morning, right? And it just came out of me. And the next day I handed it to the producers. It was the first script I handed them. They looked at me, they're like, this script's incredible. Yeah, as I just wrote it last night. I'm like, okay, we can film this, let's go. And so I just want to show you what happens when a Muslim gets involved in the discussion of information about what Islam is. And what you're going to see here in this clip is one of the critiques we got from the people who like to critique things is that the cell of the Al-Qaeda cell was not all Arabs and Pakistanis. It was actually primarily Europeans, Caucasian, disgruntled people who had been converted to a radical, false vision of Islam. And one of the characters here that you'll see debating the Imam is French. At the time, we got a lot of things from people that don't like Muslims said, this is an example of how Hollywood is lying about Islam, because it's all these brown people that are doing it. And we had already done the research as ISPU is doing the research, and they didn't have the information, but we did, that what Al-Qaeda was already evolving to when I wrote this episode a few years ago, it was already evolving. You didn't want people that looked like me. We're easily profiled. They wanted some blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy that would get through the discriminatory systems because they are smarter than they're often given credit for. And so the characters are based on real people. There's a French jihadi, I don't even like that word, but there's a French extremist that was captured shortly after the episode premiered, on which this was based on. And so I want you to see what happens when a Muslim enters into the information discourse. No one else could have written the scene you're about to see. Please. Thank you. I mean, that went on for another 30 minutes on that, 40 minutes in that show. I quoted Quran, Hadith, Sirah. That was one episode out of 2 seasons, and that entire episode was dedicated to that, and people were just stunned. They had never heard anything to counter the narrative that was being presented to them. And that is what I shouldn't say groups like, there is only one ISPU, right? That is what ISPU is doing. When we talk about the evolution from when I was a kid in the 70s, when the Banquet woman is kicking, some Arab sheik with 40 wives' butt, right, to where we are today in television and in movies, what's actually happening, not just that, but in the mainstream discussion, we're actually going in a dangerous discussion because we went from ignorance to misinformation to specifically manipulated information. Okay, where we are now is you're having people who are anti-Muslim bigots who are superficially studying the Quran and Islamic history and the Sunnah in order to find things they can use. And for example, they act like they're more knowledgeable about Islam than our scholars. And they're the ones being quoted on television. They're the ones that create the Sharia hysteria. They're the ones that, one email I got when I wrote something for the Huffington Post, I got an email from a Christian blogger, or I should say Christian extremist, because this is not the behavior of a Christian. A Christian doesn't behave this way, but this extremist blogger from a website that called himself Christian emailed me, said, everything you said about Islam is a lie. I didn't even need to read your article because Islam permits taqiyya. He starts giving me all this complex theological argument about this random, thing that comes out of some points of jurisprudence that most Muslims have never heard of, right? This guy is arguing fiqh with me. I mean, come on. And the thing is, the Muslims don't have the answers because they don't even know this stuff. So how do you respond to that? That is what ISPU is doing. That's why you have to support it. I'm going to give one final thing, and then I'll take questions. I want to talk a little bit about my novels because, I'll have a few. There are a few available for sale, and I'll be happy to sign them if anybody wants them. But the novels represent another thing because this is the thing that I don't want you to do. I talk about the Muslim that doesn't help. If you're not part of the solution, part of the problem. Okay, we have that within our community. One of the biggest struggles I had when I decided I was going to write a novel about Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, some of the biggest obstacles I faced were the Muslim community because my publisher Simon & Schuster put it out there and many Muslims were already running away from it without reading it because they were so used to the anti-Islamic or anti-Muslim propaganda in literature that they assumed this would be some kind of disgusting, romance novel about Aisha and the Prophet. They didn't bother to find out the facts. And I actually, astaghfirullah, I got death threats. I actually got real death threats that I had to get the FBI involved in. So that's the level of foolishness amongst the foolish in the community. And that's what I don't want you to be. But I want to give you an example. At an event like this, I spoke last year. And when I gave a talk, I asked for questions, and a gentleman stood up at an event about this size, and he said, he hadn't read my book, and he said, Astaghfirullah, I believe that you are a sinner, maybe you're a munafiq, maybe you're even a kafir, right? But I know that you have committed a grave sin in writing the story of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the form of a novel, right? And how do you respond to that? And I said, brother, I may very well be a sinner, I may very well be a munafiq, only God can judge those things, right? I mean, he knows my heart better than you do, and certainly better than even I do, right? Because we all delude ourselves. So you may be correct. I don't have the answer to that. I will tell you why I wrote the book, and then I'm going to give you something that happened, because I want you to understand the power of information, okay? So this is what I said to him. I said, the reason I wrote the book is I asked the audience, how many people have the Sirah, the biography of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in their house? And pretty much most people raise their hand, right? It's up there, kept with the Quran, right? How many of you have read it? 99% of the hands go down. I'm saying, how many of you read it? You haven't read it, right? Because you look at it and, okay, This looks like a lot of scholarship I don't understand. I love the Prophet, and put the book back, right, okay? And you don't know what an incredible story. This is better than Lord of the Rings. This is better than Star Wars. This is the best story I've ever come across as a storyteller, right? And so I said, these people are not reading this. Because I love to read, I knew the story, and I tell Muslims all my life accounts of like, oh, this happened with this Sahaba. They're like, you're just making that up. I'm like, you don't even know these great stories. So I put my knowledge, and I spent 10 years researching it, and I put it into the book. And now, subhanAllah, I get emails from all over the world where Muslims, young and old, email me and said, I didn't know any of this happened. And since you wrote it as a novel, I had to go back and read the seerah to confirm whether you're making this stuff up. And then I discovered the seerah is incredible. The story of our Prophet, this is the best story you're ever going to come across, right? And so that was its purpose. That's what I said to the brother. And I said, I want to share with you a story, and I'll share that with you here as well. Because I want to share with you the power of information, because you don't know how Allah is going to influence people with the information you're getting, right? You don't know how He's going to change hearts. It still shakes me up to tell this story, because I'm not worthy of anything that came out of the story, but it's an example, okay? Right after my novel came out, I got an email a few months later from a woman who was not a Muslim. She emailed me through my website, said, I really need to talk with you. Please call me immediately. It's an emergency. And here's my cell phone. And she was a single mom in New York. I was like, what's this all about? It's an emergency. She said, I read your book. I need to talk to you. So I called her, said, ma'am, how can I help you? She said, I'm not a Muslim. I've got a couple of friends who are Muslim. I never really asked about the religion. I'm not really interested in Islam. But I am interested in historical fiction. Like, I love reading about Queen Elizabeth and Cleopatra, and I have all these books, And so I was in the bookstore, and I saw, my friends have mentioned Aisha. Sure, nice cover. Sure, I'll buy it, right? She said, and I read your novel, and I finished it last night. And she emailed me the next morning. She said, I finished it last night, and I thought, it's a really good novel. I think I learned some stuff about Islam. It's a really good adventure story, all this stuff. These characters are interesting. And I put it aside with my other books, Cleopatra, Queen Elizabeth, Nefertiti, all that stuff, right? And she said, I went to sleep last night, and your Prophet came to me in a dream. And he said, come to Islam. All right? That still shakes me up telling that story. And I said, okay, because I don't know what to say to that, right? So, can you tell me what you saw? And I'll tell you what you saw. And, Allah knows the truth of any of these things. All I know is that we're still Facebook friends, and, and so we talk. But she told me, I saw a vision. And she kept calling me your Prophet because she was not a Muslim. She said, I saw a vision of your Prophet standing in front of a crowd of people. It's some kind of oasis, and there's like all these volcanic hills. She's describing Medina. She's never been to Medina, right? And so it's an oasis, and then he's standing in front of a wall that's unfinished. That's still being built, and that's the Masjid of Medina, right? That he built with his own hands. And he's standing there, and there's two circles. There's a circle of men at his feet, and there's a circle of women. The men are all dressed in white. The women are dressed in beautiful, colorful clothing and colorful headscarves. And your Prophet is standing there, all fully dressed in white, and he was preaching that Islam is love and beauty and service to humanity. And I had to ask, well, what did he look like, right? And so I had to ask. And she said, I couldn't see his face. His face was covered with this bright light. All I could make out was that he had a beard, but I couldn't make out any features. And I was so drawn to the magnificence of the aura that was emanating from his face that I kept looking at him and not paying attention to what he was saying. And then a voice in the dream thunders, don't worry about what he looks like. That's a distraction. Only listen to his words. And she woke up and she emailed me. I share that story with you because of all the things I expected the death threat, I expected all this other stuff. I didn't expect this, okay? And that stays with me. Because I'm not a particularly good Muslim. One day some crappy thing will show up on the internet that's going to be embarrassing. I'm human, okay? So please forgive me when that happens. But, being Hollywood, stuff happens, right? So, however, I love this deen, and I know everyone here loves this deen, okay? ISPU is not a Muslim organization or Islamic organization. But what they're doing here is they're doing the greatest service. Because for the last 10 years or 15 years, we've had a lot of these advocacy groups, and you all know who they are, and they're doing important work. I've met a lot of them. I will say this much without any specifics. Many of the people I meet, they seem to love conflict. They seem to thrive off of it because their job is to advocate, and so whenever there's drama, they got a press conference and they love it, right? That's not what ISPU is doing. ISPU is doing the Muslim thing. Islam is not about creating conflict and then putting out a press release. Islam is about spreading the word. There's a hadith, and I don't know how, and people often sometimes say, brother, I don't know if that hadith is sahih. I don't know. I just go with wisdom when I hear wisdom, so I'm not going to bother about the isnad or anything. I'll tell you this hadith that I heard. And please forgive me, Mom, if it's not a sahih hadith. It sounds wise to me, okay? I heard a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, Islam is like water. It takes the shape and color of the container it is in. And there's wisdom in those words. And if you think about water, water flows. It spreads. It brings life. If you try to destroy it, it just takes another form. You burn it, it goes to the sky, heaven, and comes right back, right? The support you're giving. I've been in Hollywood 10 years. Muslims are always asking me, oh, brother, you're making all these movies. Why don't you go to these rich guys in the Middle East and get money for your movies on Salahuddin, on I have a movie on the Taj Mahal, which is sort of Wille brothers, which is sort of sitting there, right? And I've been to the wealthy people of the Middle East, and they're different from you. There are affluent people here, subhanAllah, may Allah bless you and give you more. But you've all worked hard for and earned it. You didn't find it in the ground. You didn't win a lottery and think you're the smartest guy on earth. And the challenge I faced when going to these Muslims who won the lottery is the last thing they want to do is help Islam and help other Muslims. The money they have, they'd rather be hanging out with Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. They don't want to actually help the deen, right? Okay? Every dollar you give here, this is not a group of people that are seeking to become famous. I'm in Hollywood. I recognize that type, right? And I'll tell you, the most heartbreaking moment is when you meet a movie star you've idolized and you realize that they're crap. And you're like, I can't hang out with this guy. Right? This guy's a loser, right? It's really a horrible moment because you lose your icon, right? And because those who seek fame, I know it, right? Those who seek fame are motivated with the wrong things and it always comes back to you. The people here are true Muslims. They're working. They're not seeking personal aggrandizement. They're not seeking to create conflict or to create drama. They're seeking to educate. They are the only ones who can provide the information that will counter this new effort of manipulated information that's being sent to us. Please, please give them everything you've got. When all these other groups come and go, inshallah, they'll be here in 200 years helping us. Help them now, please. Islam.